Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining our workshop on starting the year off right with water. I'm Sandy Barr. I'm the director for the Grand Canyon chapter of Sierra Club. That's the Arizona chapter. And I use she, her pronouns. I live in Central Phoenix on traditional Akimel, O'odham, and Peepash lands. And I am very excited and pleased to introduce our two panelists for this evening who are water experts. Tonight we'll be hearing from Tricia Girodet, who is a longtime water advocate, the best friend to the San Pedro River, and really someone who has spent a great deal of time learning water issues. And then also with us this evening is Jennifer Martin. She is the Water Sentinels program director for the Grand Canyon chapter, and she too is a water expert, and including an expert at helping to get people connected to their watersheds through the Water Sentinels program. Tonight, she's going to be talking a little bit more about some of the governor's processes and what has come out of those. Our first speaker will be Tricia Girodet. So Tricia, thank you, and take it away.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I live in Sierra Vista in Cochise County and San Pedro River issues. So I start with the ending, frequently do. Arizona water law, it's a mess. Okay, now I'll work backwards. A variety, I've seen that people are from a variety of locations around the state. And so you may have some familiarity with water laws in Arizona and may not. Most of the population of Arizona lives in the cities. You live in what's called an active management area, an AMA. And as a result, there are some conditions about water use and water laws and all that. And you may have learned recently about some Phoenix area cities were declared to have an inadequate water supply, and they couldn't move forward on subdivision. So that brought a lot of attention to some of those state water laws.
If they could put a mine there, the mine owned land, they could do it without regulation.
So Pamela's iPhone was not muted. There, Sandy took care of it. And I live in what's about 2/3 of the area, the physical area of the state, called rural areas, where there are effectively no water laws, no restrictions on pumping. And so we have two very different management schemes. But within the AMAs, the active management areas covering Phoenix and Tucson and Greater Phoenix and a couple of other cities, the laws that do govern whether or not there is what's called an assured water supply only apply to subdivisions for residential development. So they don't apply to manufacturing facilities or commercial lands. So they're not comprehensive. They're not necessarily consistent for some of us. And in the rest of the state, which is again where I live, it's really the Wild West. So in my county, there have been some very large industries who have moved in and sunk very deep wells. And they have pumped as much as they want, as long as they make use of that water, like growing alfalfa. And they have dropped the water levels so significantly that individuals' wells are going dry. And those individuals have no recourse, basically. They either have to have the money to spend to deepen their own well, or they get water somewhere else and haul them in gallon jugs, or they walk away from their property, which some people have had to do. So the water laws in the state are not helpful to a lot of people, and they're pretty confusing, as you might be able to imagine from my very quick overview here. And I do best personally when with answering questions because I think a canned talk doesn't deal with where you are or what you understand or what you've seen. And so once we're done with our presentations, be very happy to try to answer questions from as much as I know about where you are and what the water laws are. And if Jennifer's ready, I'll turn it over to her to try to explain how the new governor and the new set of people have tried to deal with some of the confusion that I have tried to explain.
Okay, happy to do so. Sandy, can I share my screen? Yep, looks like I can. So. There we go. My name's Jennifer Martin, and I'm the Arizona Water Sentinels Program Manager for the Grand Canyon chapter of the Sierra Club. And I will be talking to you a little bit today about the Governor's Water Policy Council. So on January 9th, 2023, Governor Katie Hobbs issued an executive order to establish the Governor's Water Policy Council, which is tasked with modernizing the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. The council was directed to provide the governor with recommendations by December of 2023, which they did. Two subcommittees were formed, one related to the assured water supply and one related to rural groundwater. The Groundwater Management Act established areas of increased regulation in Arizona's most populous and fastest growing areas, which were and are heavily reliant on mined groundwater, which is water pulled from underground aquifers using wells. These areas of increased regulation are known as active management areas, or AMAs. And AMAs are made up of numerous provisions and programs, one of which is the Assured Water Supply Program that Tricia mentioned earlier, which limits the use of groundwater by new subdivisions. So before land can be subdivided, either the developer must demonstrate a 100-year assured water supply for the subdivision, and then they receive a certificate, or they show that the subdivision will be served water by a municipal water provider that has demonstrated a 100-year assured water supply for its service area, and that's known as a designated provider. So some fast-growing areas like Buckeye are now finding that a supply can't be demonstrated for developers to get certificates or for the municipality to become a designated provider. And that's due to numerous failures of the Groundwater Management Act, one of which is the prevalence of what's known as legacy pumping, or pumping that was going on before the 1980 Groundwater Management Act was passed and was grandfathered in at the time. The governor tasked the council with updating the Assured Water Supply Program within some parameters. The proposals must protect the strength and integrity of the program. They should enable future growth without reliance on mined groundwater. They may not reduce the 100-year requirement or increase the depth to which groundwater may be pumped, and they must ensure there's water before growth, and they must protect consumers. So the committee came up with 3 proposals. One was called the Alternative Pathway to Designation proposal. One is the Build to Rent proposal, and one is the Wildcat Development proposal. The first is called the Alternative Pathway to Designation, and this would allow communities like Buckeye to become designated providers by changing some of the requirements to do so. So this program is problematic because one of the provisions states that existing pumping and physical availability of water will be grandfathered in, meaning that the fact that water has been being pumped up till now will be taken as demonstration that it is available. And that's troublesome because it continues this grandfathering in of existing uses that was one of the failures of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. So it fails the first of the governor's stipulations that the proposal must protect the strength and integrity of the Assured Water Supply Program. Proponents tout that the proposal requires new water supplies will be used for new development, with 30% of all new supplies being set aside to substitute the existing groundwater pumping. But the burden of all of that legacy pumping will be left to an entity called the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District, or CAGRID, to replenish. The CAGRID was established as a function of the Central Arizona Project, which is the canal system that delivers Colorado River water to central and southern Arizona, in the mid-90s, as a kind of workaround that for developers who wanted to create subdivisions that weren't consistent with the goals of the AMAs. It created a mechanism in which developers can go ahead and develop using groundwater in amounts that would deplete aquifers, which the Groundwater Management Act was supposed to fix, and the CAGRID would have to replenish it, so long as the developer had been able to demonstrate the presence of a 100-year water supply, along with a few other requirements. Legacy pumping, since it was grandfathered in and never had to demonstrate a 100-year supply or consistency with the goals of the AMAs, is left unreplenished, while the burden of new development is placed on the CAGRID. Historically, Colorado River water Arizona received but didn't have obligations for was used for this purpose, but now we are experiencing shortages of Colorado River water and no such extra water exists. If areas like Buckeye are permitted to become designated providers through this new mechanism, suddenly all of the pumping within the service area, including the legacy pumping, would need to be replenished. This proposal allows municipalities becoming designated providers through this mechanism to join the CAGRID, thus making the CAGRID responsible for replenishment of all of that legacy pumping, which it would be ill-positioned to do. So this proposal is more of the same, making the CAGRID responsible for addressing the impacts of unsustainable growth. The second is the build to rent proposal. The rules in the AMAs require a developer to obtain a certificate of assured water supply or demonstrate that the subdivision will be served by a designated provider, like we already talked about. However, the definition of subdivision or subdivided lands in Arizona has some significant exceptions, including apartments, rental, manufactured, or mobile home communities, and leasehold offerings of 1 year or less. This has created a loophole in the law in which development can occur without a 100-year water supply, as long as it's what's known as build to rent, and it's been spreading like wildfire. This proposal would require build to rent developments to obtain a certificate of assured water supply or demonstrate that the development will be served by a designated provider, the same as other subdivisions, and it is much needed. The third is the Wildcat Development proposal. The informal term wildcat, as it's being used relative to this proposal, refers to the proliferation of development by splitting new residential parcels of 6 or more lots with the intent to circumvent laws related to the creation of a subdivision, including demonstration of a 100-year water supply. Laws related to subdivisions can be difficult to enforce because of poorly defined terms in statute. Additionally, because the penalties for breaking these laws are very minor compared to the profits developers make from illegal lot splitting, even proper enforcement would probably not stop the problem. This proposal tightens up definitions in statute to make them easier to enforce. It also applies civil penalties to each individual lot rather than a subdivision as a whole, as it is now. And this would greatly increase the penalties bad actors would have to pay, hopefully motivating compliance with the law. Third, it increases the authority of local government to ensure compliance with subdivision laws. These are all positive changes. The Groundwater Management Act, and Tricia talked about this a bit as well, only increased regulation within AMAs. Rural Arizona was left unregulated, and rural communities now find themselves experiencing high rates of aquifer depletion. Most of these areas rely entirely on groundwater. The governor tasked the council with developing recommendations that provide a groundwater management framework that assists rural communities to manage local groundwater resources, protect water users, and sustainably manage aquifers. The committee crafted 2 proposals, the Rural Groundwater Management Area Framework Proposal and the Rural Groundwater Measuring and Reporting Proposal. The first is the Rural Groundwater Management Area Framework Proposal. The designation of one of these regulatory areas could be initiated by the Arizona Department of Water Resources, ADWR, a county board of supervisors, or through a citizen's petition. One problem with this proposal is that it states that for ADWR to initiate designation, there needs to have been a significant decrease in groundwater indicators over time, and access to groundwater supplies is being threatened. This is problematic because it requires that depletion of the aquifer has already occurred before regulations can be implemented. A council would be created to oversee the rural groundwater management area, made up of representatives of water use sectors such as agriculture, industry, and municipalities, as well as at-large members to meet the needs of the local economy, population, and water users of relevant sectors. There is no mention of environmental or ecosystem needs. This council would recommend goals and plans for the area and coordinate with tribes, water providers, and all levels of government. It is difficult to say how much good this would do because there's no guidance in the proposal on what a goal might be, only that each area must have at least one goal. This proposal is as weak or as strong as the goals the council come up with. A better proposal would require that the goals and the plans to attain those goals must achieve the standard of stabilizing groundwater levels and sustaining base flows in any connected surface waters. The second proposal they came up with is the Rural Groundwater Measuring and Reporting Proposal. This proposal recommends increased data collection and state financial assistance for well monitoring devices in exchange for voluntary annual reporting. Little is known about how much water is being pumped from rural aquifers, and this proposal is far too weak to change that. It should include mandatory monitoring and reporting. And so essentially those are the proposals that came out of the Governor's Council. There's my contact info if you have any questions going forward, and I'm also happy to answer any questions you may have right now. As is Tricia.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer and Tricia. And so why don't we go ahead and open it up for questions. If you want to stop sharing your screen, Jennifer, then we can see it.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
I think there's a red, it should be red.
Oh
but
yeah, there it is, stop share.
Yeah.
Got it.
there you go. Let me see if there are any in the chat. Yes, we will send this recording out. And then there's a hand up, looking for it. Ed.
Yeah, I was just wondering, thanks very much. That was very interesting. So what's next? Is there specific legislation that's being proposed around these proposals at this point, or do we expect to see some legislation introduced in the coming session?
Sandy might know more of the latest on that than I do. Griffin has introduced a couple of bills pertaining to the rural groundwater issues, and I think also the the build to rent and the Wildcat development proposals. And for the first proposal, the Department of Water Resources has initiated the stakeholder process that was very closed off. It didn't, I hadn't heard a ton about what was even going on in there. And that's still kind of going on behind closed doors. I haven't heard anything more recent about that. Have you, Sandy?
No, they were supposed to be doing outreach with stakeholders. So yeah, just to be really clear with everyone that that alternative path proposal for assured water supply, that is a rulemaking process specifically through the Department of Water Resources. And, you know, we thought they would be reaching out to us because we weren't invited to be on the council. And they know, I mean, I already shared that we have serious concerns about it. So, but we haven't heard from them. And then, yes, there are bills being introduced. We're hoping that there'll be some stronger bills introduced because, as Jennifer said, these measures don't get us there. We need some stronger provisions. I think, you know, the Wildcat subdivision regulation is something that there is some bipartisan agreement on, but Representative Griffin is a realtor, a rural realtor, and so is less inclined to embrace something strong. But the build to rent loophole, there may be enough consensus around that to close that loophole.
Yeah. There was a strong sense, I thought, in the council meetings of supporting both of those, really. I mean, even Gail Griffin, because it doesn't impact her personal business. She's a realtor in rural areas, but I thought there was pretty strong consensus. So fingers crossed that those at least will go through. That answer your question, Ed? More to come. Yeah, you're gonna have to watch the bills once the legislature begins business.
Yeah, Cheryl pointed out that the inside the active management areas, that there are certain wells that are not regulated, and those are known as exempt wells, and they are able to pump only 35 gallons per minute or less. So yeah. Let's see, we have some other questions. Feel free to raise your hand, pop off mute. We'll do a deeper dive next week on the Groundwater Management Act itself. So if you're wanting a little more of the details on that, we have a presentation from the Department of Water Resources specifically on the Groundwater Management Act.
And I'll pipe up on the Groundwater Management Act that Arizona is perhaps still unique in the West, if Sandy knows, saying that groundwater and surface water are magically not connected. You know, we don't know where surface water comes from. And that's contrary to physics and hydrology and geology and everything else. But Arizona has maintained that position for decades now. I see over the almost 30 years now I've been involved in this, I honestly see them moving. They've been inching towards an acknowledgement that the two are connected. And that's really a big deal in my mind for Arizona to be heading there. But I think they've kind of been forced to move in that direction because of the decades-long court case called the Gila River adjudication, and the fact that federal law recognizes that the two are connected. So Arizona's been inching towards having to admit that the two are connected, but they don't acknowledge that yet specifically. So that creates a problem with trying to protect any surface waters or habitat on streams when nearby groundwater pumping can deplete it, and Arizona says, oh, we have no idea how that happened.
That was one of the provisions that we thought was really important in the rural groundwater management, is recognition. And, you know, if groundwater pumping was threatening surface water, whether it's a stream, a river, or a spring, then that would be a reason to have a management area and to limit it. And yeah, Trisha's right. We treat, generally speaking, surface water and groundwater like they're not connected. There's a little bit of acknowledgement through a court case of subflow, but they're treated differently. And that is part of the reason we have as many dried up rivers as we do. So a real problem. Let's see, we got something in the chat.
Yeah, that's a question.
Do we know? Well, yeah, I think it depends on the issue. And oh, I should read the question because not everyone has read it in the chat. So the question was, do we know which Republican legislators are more inclined to move in the direction of greater regulation? They asked because their Democratic senator has said that bills introduced by Democrats might well be dead on arrival, and that sponsorship by Republicans or pressure by the governor would be needed. And yes, that's generally true. The minorities, the Democrats' bills are usually not heard. Although Representative Griffin, who chairs the House Natural Resources, Energy and Water Committee, doesn't hear a lot of bills. She hears mostly her own bills. If you look at her agendas, in fact, there's one for Tuesday, I think that has all her bills on it. But so yeah, they tend not to. Right now, you know, I think that there are some Republicans who would be more inclined to work in a bipartisan way, but because they're, you know, they're not chairing a committee or not serving on these committees, they're inclined not to do it. There were a couple of legislators who introduced the rural, what they call them, the stewardship areas last year, but they were basically these rural groundwater management areas. And they both Republicans, Biasucci and Borelli. Biasucci's a representative and Borelli a senator. And neither is known to be very progressive on water issues or environmental protection, but they introduced these bills And those bills, as incomplete as they were not heard either. So yeah, it's a tough place, but I think it's really important that we keep making a case for why we need these changes. And again, we have an opportunity to perhaps close at least a couple of loopholes, and anything that we can do to, turn around the opening of loopholes, I think is in the right direction. Let's see what else we got here. Governor Hobbs ended at least one of the Saudi contracts that allowed groundwater pumping where were there more contracts with either Saudis or other foreign governments? Do we know how much water is being pumped? Well, I don't know if we know how much is being pumped by non-US companies, but I can tell you there are some US companies pumping a heck of a lot of groundwater, and the aquifers don't know whether someone's from Saudi Arabia or from California or from right here in Arizona. The impacts on the aquifers are the same. The earth fissures that we see from groundwater or from the ground subsidence when we've overpumped groundwater, those are the same. So I can't tell you the breakdown, but there are definitely some US companies doing a lot of pumping that is affecting their neighbors, including in places like Wilcox. And I don't know, Trisha, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, as Sandy pointed out, the aquifer doesn't care really who's doing the pumping. We generally consider it a sub-issue, but with some research, you could probably figure out who was doing the pumping. But yeah, the damage in Cochise County is being done by a company based in Minnesota, and it's led to huge fissuring, loss of wells by private individuals, damage to roads that taxpayers have to bear the cost. So yeah, at one level, we don't care who's doing it. Need to close some of those loopholes and get some regulation in. Question from Millie about well-known US companies pumping groundwater. Well, in Cochise County, I know it's a corporation called Riverview Dairy, and they're based in Minnesota. Others, wow, anybody pumping and irrigating alfalfa would be considered a major user. So that would be Yuma. A lot of food for humans grown in Yuma. I don't know any other really big ones off the top of my head. See Jennifer shaking her hand. Yeah, big pecan growers. Yeah. Yep. And then I know someone's on here from the Santa Cruz area concerned about mining. And mining takes a lot of water, whether it's proposed lithium mine, again, in the Wilcox area, or over in Santa Cruz, where they're proposing to dewater an aquifer so that they can mine some minerals. I think lithium was one of them, and then maybe some others.
Copper, of course, yeah. I mean, the
around Tucson. Copper.
Resolution, copper mine out at Oak Flat would dewater a huge area. Yeah, they're definitely big water users. They are problematic from a water quantity and a water quality, because the mines are always at the top of the list for the toxic release inventory as well. And many of our Superfund sites are related to mining. So, yeah.
I was gonna say in Santa Cruz, the South 32, that's a manganese mine, and they've actually been given a permit to mine to use 6 million gallons of water a day and to put it back into Harshaw Creek, which is known to be polluted. So there, even though part of Santa Cruz County is in an active water management area, they are completely unregulated.
Yeah, mining generally is.
Yep, the mines are not subject to the Groundwater Management Act, so. And
Yeah.
that is, I mean, the developers have brought this up about, they have to have an assured water supply, but the big industrial operations do not. And we have certainly advocated that everyone should have to. So, yeah, it's,
I mentioned that briefly, but yeah.
Yeah,
they're-
that's right.
Yeah. Tim, who probably knows the answer, Tim Flood, asks if there are state agencies who can weigh in about water being in rivers. And for a while, we had a brief connection with Game and Fish fellow who was active at a national level with water for wildlife. But it never went very far, partly because probably there wasn't a lot we could do in the state because of this separation of groundwater and surface water issues. It's called a bifurcated water law is what we have here. Tim,
There are,
you
Oh,
know
I
an answer.
I was just gonna say that there's also the in-stream flows for wildlife. There's been some application of that, but then, and that's a way to basically leave some water in the river for wildlife, but that had pretty limited application because they made it a lot more difficult. But I thought this was a good opportunity to talk about a bill that we worked on, which is more of a water for nature bill, where people could go ahead, and if they have a water right, they don't need to use all that water. They can designate it specifically for the river and or stream, or that kind of thing. And so that's a mechanism that we've been trying to promote to try to get more water for nature. But the problem for the agencies is the laws are just not very good.
Well, that was the point of my question, is that when Gail Griffin and other committee chairs hold their meetings and have their bills heard, it seems to me like it would be helpful to have relatively neutral party people, like the biologists at the agencies, speak up and say what the damage is, and that the bills that are being proposed not only don't do anything to help, but they're continuing to harm our natural resources, our state assets. And I don't think that they listen to environmentalists very much down to legislature, but when somebody from a state agency gets up and says something negative about a bill, that might carry some weight. It's politically very, very difficult to do. I understand that, but we have a new governor, and they need to hear these things. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen.
Do you think that some people would feel secure enough in their jobs to be able to speak up with a new governor, Tim? I mean, we know that's a risk.
Yeah, it's a risk, but it depends on who the heads of the agencies are and whether the head of the agency is going to back them up or the head of the agency, she or he themselves do that testimony.
Well, that would be great. I don't,
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's good to, have experts speak up, but I think that the problem is politics, not science, and not even that there aren't, people with those backgrounds speaking up. So I do think that there is leverage that the Department of Water Resources has that could be used in the process. For example, I just talked about this earlier today, but the Department of Water Resources has all the information it needs to establish additional active management areas.
several.
That would certainly get the attention of some folks. So, if they decided to do that, and the law allows for that. So they don't need a change in the law to do that. So there are a few things that they could do within the existing structure to try to get some leverage with legislators.
And they may be using that behind the scenes by pointing out to Gail that the Wilcox Basin could be declared an AMA. And if she, thinks that the proposal might be less onerous than an AMA, maybe she ought to hear the new bill proposals. So, fingers crossed that that kind of thing is happening in the background. I don't think we'll know, but yes.
I don't know, Jennifer, did you have anything to add on that one? Sorry, I wanted to.
No, I think you guys covered it pretty well.
Let's see, Jenny Jones was asking about what kind of harm aggregate mines do to the aquifer. And I think it depends, on exactly where they're digging. They usually do a lot of harm to ephemeral waters. They're usually those aggregate mines are in some kind of waterway. Sometimes they are former perennial waters, but they certainly do a lot of harm in the waterway itself. But I don't, as far as the aquifer, I don't know of anything specific.
Well, that's the one that Attorney General Chris Mays spoke up about because it's where she grew up. Yeah.
Yeah. And that
Well, actually, it's a different one. There's two. There was one in
Oh.
Chino Valley, and that's the one that Chris Mays interfered on.
oh,
And
okay.
I thought
and
it was
they backed out of that. But there's another one that the Fanes, who own most of Prescott Valley. They were the original ranch in Prescott Valley.
Yeah.
And they're trying to put a mine, it's about a mile from the Dewey Prescott border. And it's not far at all from my property. And yeah, they backed off a little for now because we've gotten, the neighbors have gotten together and protested and they withdrew their application, but that doesn't mean that they're not gonna, try again to regroup. So yeah, it's a big concern.
Just a little bit on the backstory on sand and gravel operations, these aggregate mines, they're regulated very lightly because, and one of the reasons that they have such a good deal is the former speaker of the House, Rusty Bowers, that he was in the legislature once, and then when he left, he worked for the Arizona Rock Products Association. And so while he was in the legislature and when he was out of the legislature, he helped to make sure the laws were as weak as possible, including that provision that prohibits counties from doing really anything to regulate mines. That's something that got added. I remember when we fought that. So there's that, and then they have very weak reclamation requirements as well. So I just thought I would mention that about Rusty Bowers, because there's a lot of times people go back and forth and help to serve the interests of particular industries that they worked for.
Yeah, and yeah, I was shocked to know that in the Chino Valley issue, you only have to have 5 acres to put a mine on your property in Arizona. And I was just astounded. And this was right across the street from a residential subdivision. I mean, there were people like 250 feet from this property, and they were going to put this thing on there. And they would have if probably if Chris Mays hadn't intervened. So yeah, that law needs to be changed for sure.
Yeah, no, if you focus on kind of deregulation for a few decades, it actually has real impacts on the ground to people. And hopefully we are turning that around right now. The governor vetoed a lot of bills in 2023 to stop some further weakening of our laws. And so we may see more of that. But again, hopefully we'll also be able to get through a few provisions to better protect some of these waters. What is this question? Does anyone know of bills or organizing in the state to support or mandate use of more pervious surfaces in development in order to reduce the runoff problem? And let's see. Sorry, it was moving while I was trying to read. In order to reduce the runoff problem, that when rainwater we get can't penetrate the earth to recharge the aquifer. I don't know if there's any specific bills, but there are some cities that have requirements for more pervious surfaces. So
yeah, some entities have done that, either probably cities for sure, and maybe county, although I'm not aware of any. It's a great thing. I don't know why more don't do it. I guess they're not aware of it, perhaps. Not likely to be supported at a state level, certainly to mandate. It would be good to get a state bill that would support it. But the situation in this state at this time, they're not big on mandating much of anything to help the environment, for sure.
yeah.
The legislative composition and the polarization of the two parties is such that we have to change the composition of the legislature before there's much chance of changing laws, I think. I'll go ahead and throw out that politics there.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think there are a few opportunities this year, and I do think it's important for legislators, irrespective of their party affiliation, to hear from people in their districts who care about these issues. Otherwise, it's easy for them to say, well, I never hear from anyone. People in my district don't care about this issue. And of
Yeah.
course, we know
And I'm
that's
passionate about that because I've heard Gail Griffin say, oh, I never heard from anybody. It's like, well, partly people who care in the area where I live know that she's not going to, be supportive, so they don't contact her. But that allows her to then say, I never heard from anybody. And that just drives me wild. So please, whoever your legislator is, even if you're not going to move them, let them know what you care about. Thank you.
all right. Did we run out of questions? Narrow majorities in both houses, yeah, for sure. And with those narrow majorities, we can kill bad legislation sometimes in the legislature, and then of course sometimes with the governor's veto. But it's much harder than to get to the 31 votes in the House and the 16 in the Senate to actually pass good legislation. And of course, the key is to actually get it heard. One of the things I think it's helpful for people to share when they're talking to their legislators is concern about good bills not being heard. Especially, there are a lot of really good bills, and we'll be getting you those bill numbers and going over the specific bills in that last webinar, the one called Bills. We'll go over those, and you'll also get some handouts with some information on them as well. But there's some really good bills, and even just measuring how much groundwater is being pumped in these rural areas. That metering bill can't get a hearing right now, and so we'd like to see some movement on that. I know we're approaching the end. I don't know, Jennifer or Tricia, do you have anything to add? Are there any other questions?
I'd like to add, for those who might be new to all of this, or at least some of it, that it's a somewhat astounding to me process in the legislature that a chairperson who is assigned to be chair of a committee has the power to not hear a bill or bills, multiple. And I feel that that's a very wrong process. I'm not going to get it changed, but I think people need to be aware that your legislator might work really hard on crafting a good bill. And if the chairperson doesn't want to hear it, that is the end of it. And that doesn't seem right to me as a process. That's it.
Agreed. And that's something the legislature itself, the House and Senate respectively, could change in their own rules. And they could say, every bill gets a hearing. And this was years ago a proposal by Common Cause that there be a 5-bill limit per legislator and that every bill gets a hearing.
Yes.
So, that could be interesting. I just put the link for the next webinar, the one on groundwater and the Groundwater Management Act on, I think it's January 9th, in the chat. And so if folks hadn't seen that and you're interested, check that out. And we will be, if you can't make it, we will be recording that as well, and we'll be providing the recording. So anything else? Jennifer, you still there?
Yep, I'm here. I really appreciate everyone's engagement and everyone being here tonight.
Great. Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Trisha, for sharing your knowledge and for taking questions. And thank you, everyone, for coming here and listening and asking good questions. And I know you probably have even more questions because that's what happens, especially with water. I just want to say that don't feel intimidated by it. You know, it may seem complicated in some ways at first, but in a lot of ways it's very simple. We just need to use less water and we need to be developing and have agriculture that is less water intensive and developing processes that are more sustainable. You don't have to be a water expert to know that. So I hope you'll stay engaged and look forward to seeing you on the future webinars and at Environmental Day at the Capitol. So thanks so much. Bye, everyone.